Hatha on opening the sutra. The Dharma incomparably profound and infinitely subtle is rarely encountered even in millions of ages. Now we see it, hear it, receive and maintain it. May we completely realize the Tathagata's true meaning.
So good evening, everybody. Things got a little cooler outside. It's been a nice break from some of the heat that we've been having recently. We're clearly in the belly of summer at this point, and it's just absolutely wonderful. I actually kind of relish the heat. I don't know whether it's nature or nurture, but I developed, I used to describe it as an inhuman love for the heat. I would have summer jobs as a British reenactor, and I would be dressed in wool with a big black felt hat, 45 Celsius humidex weather, and just like perfectly fine standing out in the bright sun. And still I like a cool breeze, so this is nice. Of course, in our own community, being in summer, it's got a different flavor to it. Because to be in summer is to be in the middle of Jukai, whether you're an initiate or you've gone through that process or not. It's most of the notes in a chord, if not all of them, and it's just playing so nice right now. We've got our initiates who are plugging along in their sewing, and their formation is starting to approach its final stage in their various sharings, reflecting on the precepts in their own lives. And Jukai Session is just around the corner. Sensei often encourages us, especially those of us who are in somewhat of a leadership or communications role or something, to really try to, really rev everyone up for a homecoming session, as she likes to call it. I like that, but I think I like more this family reunion session. Yeah. I've been to a few of those family reunions, and there's this vibe of it, because we take the precepts, and taking the precepts doesn't necessarily mean that, we're going to see you here every week for the rest of your life. Certainly there's an increased commitment to the practice, especially your personal practice with the precepts and how they work in your life. Endless, ceaseless practice. And a greater connection, whether we're aware of it or not at the time, to the teachers and to this family. And so it's always wonderful regardless of where our life takes us, when we come into the Zendo and we see faces we haven't seen in quite a while. So I always look forward to that in the Jukai session, even if I'm ducking in at meals and liturgy and hiding in the sewing room most of the rest of the time. In our way, in our family way here, Sesshin as its own thing and Jukai as its own thing, they Venn diagram in general and also in that Sesshin into something that resembles the very heart of what we do. Especially, that's been my experience of it. We come to this practice looking to alleviate suffering, starting with our own, and never losing sight of that along the way. And Sesshin, that's where some heavy work on that gets done. In Zazen, we encounter the gateway into that. And in Sesshin, we, stack and then hydraulic press those periods of Sesshin to great effect through great joyous, we'll say joyful, joyous struggle. And these precepts too, this is a gateway into, how we seek to alleviate this suffering. Not everyone here has gone through the process, but it's always good to have a reminder. In our practice, this is not our hot practice. This is not just alleviate our own suffering. This is the bodhisattvic call of the Mahayana, the alleviation of the suffering of all beings. And we take the 16 bodhisattva precepts, the 3 jewels, refuge in Buddha, and Dharma, and Sangha, and the 3 pure precepts to cease from evil, to practice good, and to actualize good for others. And then the grave precepts. I like in the English language that word for serious is also a word for a hole in the ground where we end up. There's something darkly funny about that for me. But our 10 grave precepts, to take up the way of not killing, to take up the way of not stealing, to take up the way of not misusing sexuality, of not speaking falsely, of not clouding the body or mind, to not speak of the faults of others, to not praise ourselves while abusing others, to not spare the Dharma assets, to not indulge in anger, and to not defame the 3 treasures. I first took these precepts in 2010, and again in 2022. Jukai is a portion of the ordination ceremony. And in our modern day, this is something that is not only accessible for people who ordain. Because in this Mahayana way, these precepts, this is how we show up as a bodhisattva. Okay, we come to the cushion, learn Zazen, get beginning instruction, find that there is some equanimity, there is some stability that we touch. My favorite question, how do we get this to show up off the cushion? There's a few different answers to it beyond the one I always got when I first asked that question. But to put it in motion, one way of saying it is to study and try to show up moment to moment through the lens of those precepts. And it's not the only way that's been made available to us. I mean, the alleviation of suffering, this was the point of Shakyamuni's struggle, awakening, and teachings. And so the Four Noble Truths, and he elucidated the nature of suffering so that we might be able to see through it. And then he, very honestly, he needs to say more about this. How do we alleviate this suffering? What is it like to put this into motion? And the first expression beyond that we have recorded that he came up with was that Eightfold Path. Last week I had something to say about right view, which is basically starting off saying, go back to that previous teaching and make sure you're really clear on this nature of suffering. That it is our nature, or at least it is the nature of the world we live in, but that we note it has a source, and we note that it can have an end, and that there's a pathway to that end. The next step that is spoken of is this idea, again, step, be careful when I use that word, because the Eightfold Path is simultaneous in its arising. But the second thing listed in that teaching is right intention. And is it just last week, the teaching retreat? We went through so much of the liturgy, and towards the end of the retreat, Sensei and Roshi talked about how we set intention and we dedicate merit when we engage in activities. And so there was some time for them to talk about the idea of intention in general. And I really loved the way they talked about intention and intent, not just switchable terms, but that when we set out with intention, it's what we would normally think of. I have the intention to do good. I go into my classroom on Monday morning with the intention that everyone is going to have a wonderful day. The kids are going to feel safe and comfortable at home. They're going to achieve their learning goals. What a lovely thought. And any of us have endless intentions for how our day is going to go. Hopefully they're good intentions. Intention is something of the mind, and so you can wield it, or it can wield you. So you can have a bad intention for something. We prefer not. I mean, go back again, right to that first teaching. Life and suffering. Yeah, we can do better. So this is what we would say as far as intention. And then Rinzin went on to talk about the idea of intent, though. So we set intention the way we would normally think. We have this idea that we want to do well at the outset. We plan to do well at the outset. But that intent is something different. And he talked about the idea of intent as, and I hope I absorbed this accurately, this is how we hold our mind as we proceed. This is how we hold our focus on what we are doing as we are moving through. That is not enough to just say, I want to do good, and then be very sloppy with that mindset as we proceed. I can think of how that in the past, how that's not lined it up for me I know with my teaching of students. I teach students with special needs, wide range of behavioral profiles. And the names have been changed to protect the young. But I have the student, David, and when he gets upset, he starts swearing. Okay? Whatever great-grandpa you had that was in the Merchant Marine, David would make him blush. And it's 0 to 100, like that. And I can think of a time when David started swearing in the midst of me trying to teach him something, and I could not de-escalate it, and I got angry with him. And as is the protocol, he had to go out of the room. But I made sure he got out of the room from a place that was very angry. My intent was wrapped around of wanting him away. Ugh, this moment, this how could you mind. And I can think of a time when Sarah, who was just yelling and just getting louder and louder because things were not unfolded as expected, we had to act very quickly for the same kind of outcome. Get Sarah into the hall. But the intent and the intention came from a place of the impact that Sarah's yelling was having on the other special needs children in the room. Seeing the agitation, seeing the anxiety, the fear of the noise. Now, at the outside, how David and how Sarah were met by me might look the same, but it hits very differently, especially for me, I know. The agitation, the anger, in one instance. The very elevated moment of awareness, but acting to preserve and protect everyone, including Sarah's experience in the other. And I know as well that this affects the vibe in the classroom. So everyone's affected in both cases. And I have to imagine the wounding I do to myself even, as well as David and the room as a whole, has to have an impact on my future interactions with him. When we set intent and then we live, that intentionality, that intent becomes action. And so it's interesting, when I learned about the Eightfold Path the first few times, it seemed like a list, and they said, you can look at it in order, it all kind of rises simultaneously. But there is a wisdom to right view first and right intent, setting that seed in our heart and in our mind before we put into action. A lot of the other steps are about the action that we take. But where does it arise from? Even without even talking about it in these terms, we hear Sensei, we hear Roshi talk about this idea of when we act from our center, when we act from that equanimity, that clarity, and the good effect, the good karma, the absence of negative karma that arises. It's neat. This is new to me, having to have something to say. And so I make my notes and I start talking about things, and then I remember teaching an angle of it that I've heard from my teachers. I'm having fun because I'm uncovering more as I do that. In reading from Bhikkhu Bodhi, he talked about the idea of two kinds of intention. And he talked about the intention of renunciation. And long enough ago in the history of the Buddhist Sangha, to be a renunciant was to join the Sangha, and to join the Sangha was to become a monk or a nun. This is not the only pathway in now. The Bodhisattva way is accessible to all, and especially one of the benefits of the way the practice has landed in the West. But when we are renouncing, we are not necessarily renouncing daily life, clearly. We have lives. But we are renouncing, as Sensei would say, the samsaric egoic mind. We're saying, you are not the primary driver of this vehicle anymore. That my intent, my vow, is going to be the primary vehicle. And spiritual technology is available. It's embedded right in that. Doan has talked about the 4 purifications as a tool as well for when things don't quite work out as intended, or maybe they did work out as intended and the intent wasn't so good. But then when there are those missteps, to recognize, to regret, to repeat not, and then to redirect that focus and that intent. And the other type of intention that Bhikkhu Bodhi talks about is this intention of goodwill. This was kind of fun because I read through it the first time and I said, doesn't this sound a little contrived? And then I got to the next section and he basically says back to me, it's like, by the way, this is not contrived, and here's why. Our thoughts, we know, come and go. We see this in Zazen. And in the development of goodwill as a tool for having good intent, if we waited for it to arise spontaneously, we'd have very few and narrow windows because the mind, our emotional just rightness is unreliable. So much of our mind stream that is kind of inconstant, jumps around. So we train it. I'm a big fan of mind training. If you take a moment, you look around at our matrix of how we practice, it's all through It's all through there. Practicing metta for people, we've encountered the metta prayer, the metta sutta, just the very nature of, let's get the words more accurate. This is something that I had not, it's out there to come across, but I had not come across it until I was coming across it in our community. But the metta prayer, and I'll use all beings here, but there's a formula for working on this internally. May all beings be safe. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings live in peace. May all beings be at ease. And then there's a formula of working through this where you can do that same thing as a meditative exercise with yourself. May I be safe. May I be healthy. May I be happy. And then you can radiate outward. Someone you love. May Shokai be safe. May Shokai be healthy and not abandon me here. And then on someone who is neutral, someone who we're not too fond of, and then maybe the worst person you can think of, the person who really hooks you. And then not even just stop there, but then to extend it to your community, your nation, this world, all beings. This is a loving kindness mind training, and why wouldn't we want to train our mind to be this way? And this is the moment where I got, well, isn't this a little contrived? And I realized I'm already, through my bad habits, training my mind. Okay? when I'm mad at somebody and I'm sitting there telling the story, I'm going through a mind training to really justify the solidity of that anger and just, really convince myself that, this person's garbage, whatever the story is. Okay? And just like that anger I had with David in trying to respond to what was coming up, that radiates in me. There's negative karma that gets generated there, even if the immediate effect is in here. And so why wouldn't we want to combat that with something better? We're already doing that negative kind of mind training. Might be worth offsetting it, replacing it. In fact, Bhikkhu Bodhi actually talks about teachings of the Buddha from the Pali Canon, where he talks about literally doing that as a replacement activity. The negative thought arises and we replace it. And so he's talking about mind training. This right intention it's in the shade of green in the trees of this summer. Because this right intention is an arrow that points right through the center of those precepts, right through the heart of Jukai. My intention to manifest this way, my intention to train my mind stream, it's so healthy in the summer. Maybe because I'm a high school teacher and I have the summer off and there's less stresses on me, so sure, yeah, it's easier to practice. And the last 2 summers I've been doing it here, and I'm surrounded by a practice community, so sure, in some ways maybe that's easier to practice. But I do like the warmth. And I think when some of those stresses are off, it's easier to see clearly, or clearer. So for me, this is definitely a season, always is, to reconnect with the precepts. Reconnect to these ways of taking our intention and putting it into motion. Putting it out into the world. Taking it out into the world. At the start of the talk, I was talking about the Jukai session. It's a very special celebration of the heart of this good intention. And there are so many people around us who have taken up that way of practice, whether formally or simply by wanting to come here and put themselves on the cushion. As they say, no one can do this practice for you, but you can't do it alone. Or you can't do it alone. Both parts are true. And I'm very grateful for this family that's taken up this path. I would encourage you, if you're in town especially, to physically come and be a part of this. Maybe it's an opportunity, if you're new to the community, to come. If you're going to come to a session for your first day of session, this is a rockin' one to come to. And if you've taken Jukai, it's family reunion. You ever go to family reunion and there's cousins there, you have no idea who they are? Yeah. Our family's getting big. And there's a great joy in that. And I hope that creates a freedom to reconnect, an encouragement to reconnect. And there's a lot of people, these initiates, who are taking the way formally. It would be wonderful to come out and support them by your presence, so that they know too, as much as they are doing this practice themselves, they are not doing it alone. So I encourage you to come to some of it. It's fun. In the way session is fun, which it is. Come to some of it. Come for yourself. Come for the initiates. And come for the sake of all beings. There are worse ways that we can spend our intention in this world. Hope to see you there. May it be so.
Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. you, everyone. That concludes our service for this evening. Are there announcements tonight? We may have a rare non-announcement closing. Thank you all for your practice. Please restore the Zendo.